Alan Bloom was arguing this from the history of political philosophy, and Tubia and Cosmides and the evolutionary theorists are looking at this from the field of evolutionary biology and psychology. They don't know what the answer is to fixing this. They're just saying it is. And you get a whole bunch of other professors talking about the problem. We're offering the solution and where this has gone, and it's going to be a highly explanatory model.
Hi, I'm Taylor with RGB Truth. I'm here with my good friend George McMillan. He's been teaching me a lot lately about the 7P plan mainly. And if you've ever wondered why the left is doing what they do, why Marxists do what they do, or why weird things are happening in America today, well, there's a method to the madness, and George can explain quite a bit. How you doing, George?
Oh, I'm doing great. Yeah, I'm George McMillan. I've been a little bit brief about me. I've been an analyst overseas, working with different private military contractors. So we're here to produce a whole bunch of different type of academic and analytical works. It's going to be a series of videos. So these will not be one-off videos. They will build on each other like a semester course. It takes a while to learn how to do predictive analysis. The benefits of learning predictive analysis is you will be able to think very quickly to A to Z, because these are pattern recognition frameworks of analysis. Without them, people I can see people can think A, B, and C. They can't even think to M, let alone M to Z. With analytical frameworks, instead of being reactive, you can be proactive because you can go at A to Z very, very quickly in interpreting current events. So we have to start. This is going to be a situation where we're going to have to go to different subjects back and forth and explain what they are separately and then how they work together. So we have to give a little overview, very simple explanations of a few things, show how they kind of work together, and then do the whole thing again in more detail, and then keep on repeating this process. It's going to take, ultimately, it's not just going to take several months. This is going to take several years. So this is going to be an ongoing thing. Yes, you'll get people in the comments that will look at one video and say, oh, it's a straw man argument. No, they need to watch the ones before, and they need to watch the ones afterwards, because it's a very broad subject. What I want to get into now is, and we'll put this, put that video up there.
There we go.
I want to go to we're going to start off with this one. And I want to start off by going to the end where I have my book thumbnails. And in this one, Closing of the American Mind was a book that was written in 1988 by a guy named Alan Bloom, professor of philosophy at Chicago University. He was previously at Cornell. I think he got his PhD at Cornell during the 1960s. Closing of the American Mind is a seminal book. He's talking about from the area of political philosophy and political science. Those are his purviews. And just to back up a little bit, there's 4 areas of philosophy that are going to become pertinent: foundational philosophy, political philosophy, economic philosophy, and worldview geopolitical theories. So one problem of the university system is the foundational philosophy people will talk to the psychology professors, the political philosophy people will talk to the political science people, often being the same people. And then the economic philosophy people are usually arguing against their current free market economists, is usually what they do. And then geopolitical worldview psychology or worldview philosophy has kind of gone off into nonsense. What they don't do is compare them laterally integrated and then in parallel on the empirical social science side. So we'll go to that real quick.
So what you're saying is that they're not doing things correctly. They're kind of making it up as they go along, correct?
Yeah, and this, what I did is I started comparing them laterally and in parallel. So in parallel and series, if you're going to make it a electronics, metaphor out of this. So in this series of I did a literature review matrix where I take the two competing philosophical theories of the Enlightenment era, and then after communism collapsed, they should have compared the two competing theories. So there's only two teams that tried to develop a logically coherent foundational political, economic, and geopolitical worldview set of theories. David Hume and Adam Smith in the mid to late 1700s, in contrast to Karl Marx and Frederick Engels. They're opposing views of human nature. So you're looking at family conception, human nature, and government form is what you're trying to parallel. What works best? Okay, going back to the ancient Greeks, they were concerned, ancient Greeks being, well, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, those people, and into Cicero in the Greco-Roman era, if you want to include that. What they're concerned with is the nomos physis distinction, the laws of man versus the laws of nature, or in this case, you're talking about ideologies of man versus human nature, or you're talking about the ideals of man versus human nature. And one is reality, the other one's fantasy and delusion. So when you're talking about the nomos physis distinction, you're talking about reality versus delusion. So again, which one is which? You have ideological experiments, the great ideological experiments between capitalism, communism, and then gradations of market socialism. So you're talking about free market control with minimal regulation, a referee towards central planning, where it's not the referee monitoring the players, the coaches are controlling the players. So you have these different extremes. And again, using real simple, we have to start out simple. So you're going to get some keyboard genius out there. Oh, it's a straw man argument. Oh, no, this is going to take years to go through my slide sets and papers. So if someone thinks it's overly simple, I have the Unified Behavioral Theory YouTube channel. If there's such a genius, they can go straight to that. It's purely methodological. And then even then, that's just a very small portion of the amount of slide sets that I have.
Right, and you've been, doing this for a very long time, researching this for a very long time. Since I've known you, you've probably sent me, I don't know, 10, 20 rewrites of some of these papers. So you're constantly updating, constantly, battening down the hatches on stuff. So this isn't like a, fly by night kind of thing. This is something you've been planning for quite a while, correct?
Yeah, we did the 7P plan papers for the trucker convoy in mid-January.
So that was the border convoy in Dripping Springs. You spoke there.
Right.
Yes.
And then I've done several updates to try to simplify it and move people baby steps. And we're going to get into that in a minute. Unfortunately, I had to go back and forth because the topics that we're going to be discussing are based on comparing these competing theories of human behavior. I should have, in the next slide set, I'll add Immanuel Kant to this because Hume and Smith actually didn't write on the Weltanschauung worldview philosophy level. Immanuel Kant did they were contemporaries. I should have added that to this slide set to fill in that slide set because, oh, one thing I forgot to say. I'm following algebraic logic of putting everything in a matrix form. So you're comparing like terms. So you want to take the foundational philosophies of Hume and Smith and compare it with the foundational philosophies of Marx and Engels, then compare their political philosophies, then compare their economic systems, and then their worldview theory is what you want to achieve in the long run. So that's actually an outcome measure.
Yeah, so apples to apples, oranges to oranges, not crossing things over and conflating things.
Correct. So that being said, if I'm doing, and I don't know how much, for people that have taken classes in linear programming, so you're taking algebraic solving of simultaneous equations and then doing maximum minimums for, well, Pareto style models. You want to create physics style models of, you want to take two unseen forces and put it into something measurable. The example that I always use, the one that's easier to understand, my father was a fighter pilot, so it's aeronautics industry. You have the two unseen forces are gravity and atmospheric density, and you measure that by lift, thrust, weight, and drag. Okay, the first thing you want to do is get the plane off the ground. So the first unseen force is always the first objective. You want to get in aeronautics is getting a heavier than air object off the ground. The second one is your limiting force. So that's what you're trying to maximize and minimize. So when you look at lift, thrust, weight, and drag, if you have a constant of the same type of engine, if you want to go faster, you make the wings thinner for less lift, and then that's less drag. But then you're going to take more runway to get off the ground. But once you get off the ground, your terminal velocity will go up. If you increase lift, you can get off fast. You can get off the ground faster. You can carry more payload, but you're going to go slower during, in the air. There's a whole bunch of these combinations, and then you can compare that to your business school of mathematics of the time it costs to produce something, the materials, the quality, and then the cost. So if you increase quality and you want to reduce time, your cost is going to increase. So you can take engineering, physics, mathematics, and then also compare that to business school of mathematics. So these type of frameworks are very, on the physical sciences, are highly integrated. On the social sciences, they don't use this type of algebraic like terms to like terms. So the social sciences are complete chaos.
So they can't prove anything. Everything's just a practice. Everything's just kind of like I was saying, making up as you go along, right? You cannot.
Correct.
Without a model, you can't prove it.
You can't prove anything. Correct. You have to show a pattern you have to show the pattern to prove something.
And we've definitely seen this in the last couple of years that it seems like a lot of governments don't like when people notice patterns.
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, absolutely. Yeah. Well, we're going to, yeah.
So that's why it's, for people watching this, they might think this is too much. This is way too heavy. You're going to have so many eureka moments as I did when George was first talking to me about this. And everything's going to make so much more sense. You're going to have such a bigger view of things. You're not going to wonder why this person did that or this, left-leaning person did this thing you might think is silly. There's a reason for everything they do.
Yeah. So I'm kind of going over this a little bit backwards because I'm going to the book thumbnails on the back end, and then we're going to go back through the through the 7Ps. But I will do that real quick, just a second, so people have an idea what we're talking about. What you have the Professor P, which means controlling all the university professors, because then the grade school teachers, high school teachers go to university, so you're training all the educators from the preschool on up, if you can control the Professor P. But
now, so okay, let's back up 1 second here. So so the 7Ps, if someone were to control these 7Ps, then what happens to society?
Oh, you're controlling all of society.
Right. So what we're seeing now in the United States, we're seeing a very aggressive government seem to want to reshape, what they consider well, I mean, they keep calling it a democracy, but they want to reshape the republic and bring in a lot of Marxist ideals. And in order to do that, they need to control the 7Ps.
Correct. So
that's why we're going over these 7Ps, and those are everything. That is, if they have the 7Ps, they have complete control. So it's very important for people to know the 7Ps.
Yeah, and we probably should have B-rolled the Yuri Bezmenov videos. I guess we'll do that in the next one.
We can, and we're going as we go.
You're familiar with the Yuri Bezmenov videos, right?
Yes, he is the KGB defector.
Right. When he was, people that listened to that last couple of years are like, wow, that's so scary. They think the Russians in power now are trying to do that. What the point I want to make right at the beginning here is, by the time that he was talking in the mid to late 80s, it was already fait accompli. It was already done. So that was during the 80s. It's 2024 now. So yeah, it was done decades ago. And we want to explain that. So yeah, they had already taken over the Professor P. I just want to slam through these Ps, and then I want to go back to the book thumbnails. Then I want to go back to it slowly. Okay, sure. So if you can control the university system, you're controlling the K through 12 through PhD level educational system. You want to control all of it. So yeah, the students of one decade become the teachers and professors and educators of the next couple of decades.
Correct, right. And we've seen that play out in real time.
So then you've got you have the pre-law and then the law school. So you're changing the minds of those students over time. So your students then go into the workforce. Decades later, they become leaders in government and industry and everything like that. Okay. Police P, you want to replace the law and order curricula of training, and you want to make the police officers social justice warriors.
Correct. And also all gun carriers, that's including military, paramilitary organizations, any kind of authority like that, correct? Right.
We'll get into it, but the early communist revolutions were already put down by the military and police in France and Belgium and southern Germany. So they want to control that. If they're bankrupting society with the Cloward Piven plan, taking over, all the different facets of society, like the Alinsky 13 essential functions of the government. If you're trying to do that, you don't want to bankrupt society, throw it into chaos where there's martial law, when conservatives control the military and the police, because then they would have affected a left-wing coup. So what they're trying to get right now is control of the military and the police with the Antifa BLM riots, defund the police, DEI in the military. We just saw what DEI happens in the Secret Service. It works so well, right?
Right. And the thing you told me, we were discussing this a while ago, and people wonder, okay, there's got to be good, people in the military that would want to stop this, but You said that was the first thing they did. They went to the higher ups in the military to make sure that they were on their side and that there would not be any kind of military junta. That's how they prevented it. Correct?
Yeah, you just replace conservatives with wokesters. Yeah, again, we're going to get into all of this. Since politicians, a lot of politicians are lawyers anyway, but yeah, the college graduates of one generation and a couple of generation, or in a decade or two later, then become the politicians. So you want to control as many of those as possible. And then the priest P, people go to college and university, then they go into the theological schools. So if you can control the police P, you're changing that social institution. And why this stuff is important, it's going to take people a minute to learn what the 7 Ps are, how they've taken them over time, and then how they're controlling the different societal institutions. Okay. People in journalism school is part of the university system. So then you got the 6 P is the press P. Oh, I think I changed the order in this. Actually, I usually do the press P and then the priest P.
No, you're good. But I think people that are watching this, I think the light bulbs are going off in their head now. They can see absolutely this is what's happened. Yeah, I mean, I think the media, the media being taken over is probably the most obvious of all these Ps.
Yeah. And then the last one is the parent P. And this is the big one. People don't understand that Christianity and capitalism is based upon the Abrahamic conception of the family. So it's based on the nuclear family, the patriarchal conception of the family. So they want to change it to, well, let me throw this in right at the start. We'll go into detail when we go through the different 7P plan papers. This is trying to give people a quick overview of it. Then we were going to go into the different facets of it so people can apply it. Socialism, Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote his discourse on inequality among men in 1755. It's the foundation of modern leftism. And in that book, he argues that the invention of property rights, that was created so men could subjugate other men, leading to class inequalities. He also says that marital rights allowed men to subjugate women, leading to gender inequality. And then, since thou shalt not steal and thou shalt not commit adultery is in the 10 Commandments, then it's the Abrahamic religions is what causes class and gender inequality. So to get equality in society, you need to get rid of the patriarchal conception of the family, marriage, and you have to go from the Abrahamic religions to atheism. So then you're taking the matriarchal conception of the family, and then you need a government to support single mother families.
Right. And we're seeing more single parent families than ever. I mean, around the world.
Than ever. Yeah. So when you get to the worldview theories, Kant wanted to operationalize Christianism and fuse Christianity and with Socratic, Platonic and Aristotelian logic. So his worldview theories is based on, if you educate everybody to self-responsibility, then you could have constitutional republics, the proper form of democracy. And if you can educate the world and get everybody to be self-responsible, then you could have a world full of republics. So Kant's eternal peace is based on a global world full of coordinated democracies, which is what the League of Nations is based on, and then the United Nations at the San Francisco 1945 conference. So that's where these ideas come from. Hegel said, no, ultimately you need a little bit stronger of a state. So Hegel's a statist, and then Marx is a full-blown communist or socialist. And then there's different arguments about whether you get among the leftists of whether you get to socialism and communism gradually by voting it into democracy, or Marx was saying, no, you can only get there by violent revolution. So people that are angry and want to go towards violent revolution that psychological profile gravitates to Marxism. I start to get into psychological profiling at this point, but we're going to leave that for another day.
Which is extremely helpful. I mean, it coincides with everything you're talking about, which I don't think a lot of people understand, that human psychology goes hand in hand with this.
How you start doing the psychological modeling is going to take a long time. It's not the first place. It's not the best place to start off with. It is not. You have to see the macro frameworks, and then you work backwards. It's easier to see it that way. So when you start to change to a welfare state, the Fabian socialists thought you're going from a Christian aristocracy towards bourgeois democratic reforms, with the English revolutions and the French revolutions. They thought, well, ultimately we're headed towards equality in suffrage and equality and economic equality as well. You get into different arguments of politically on the political level of whether it's equality of opportunity, or the economic level, whether it's equality of outcome. So where Kant is reading Hume Smith and wants to go towards a world full of capitalist democracies, I'm dumbing this down. It's not exactly that way, but we only have, this is a YouTube video, actually it is going to be a 10 semester course, but anyway, just for brevity's sake, he wanted to create a world full of capitalist democracies because they didn't really think about having a non-market system, because it's really ridiculous once you look into it. And then for stability purposes, Hegel thought you needed more of a statist approach, a little bit more of a stronger leader approach. And then Marx thought you needed to go to full-blown communism until people can readjust to this matriarchal social system, and then the state will wither away towards socialism. Or incrementalist socialists thought that democracy would gradually go into socialism, and they want to push it that way. You call any one of those arguments of Kant, Hegel, or Marx, definitely Hegel and Marx, you call that historicist argument of philosophy and mankind is linearly, directionally headed towards a certain outcome. Kant's not necessarily into that, but he can be looked at two ways. It can be linear directional, or when you get to somebody like Nietzsche, I think at one point years ago, I wrote every book that he wrote just about. But Nietzsche was a cyclical theorist that nations rise and fall. Plato was a cyclical theorist of how governments rise and fall. They rise because the leaders really care about and bond with the masses in elite mass relationships. Family dynasties get corrupt over time and make alliances with foreign families. And then the foreign families collude against the people and they become corrupt. So he had these cycles. Then he was like, well, how do you stop it? The elite ruling class would have women and children and spouses in common and children in common. So they wouldn't know who was related to whom. So then they wouldn't try to favor their offspring, and then society wouldn't become corrupt That's the basis for Rousseauian thought. He argues that in the Republic, the first part of the Republic, he talks about how you have a good society, but over a few different generations, they changed the constitutional laws. Then it becomes a corrupt society and society collapses. He's like, how do you get an ideal state and maintain it? He goes into the Platonic version of communism. Aristotle argues in the 6 forms of government that that's the most completely unworkable piece of nonsense ever. And he has his 6 forms of government. But later on, Rousseau and the leftists revive Plato's communism and try to create a new form of government. It rises and falls during the 20th century ideological experiments, and it's not a new form of government. It just turned out to be Aristotle's dysfunctional, tyrannical or despotic or oligarchical forms. So it just proved that Aristotle's 6 forms of government is still reigns supreme as far as the dominant government form theorists. So just to give people an idea of where this is going. So yeah, let's go back up here.
So just we might add some stuff out to keep things smooth, but
I have,
it doesn't.
I have to show people on the slide sets where the different books are. On the other slide sets, I have a lot more book picture thumbnails. Need to people to actually physically see what books I'm talking about.
Yes.
So these books are used. You can go buy them for $5 or $10 on the used bookstores. People can watch videos on these things to get a synopsis. People can go on Wikipedia and get a synopsis. I want everybody to double check all my sources. All right. So going through that brief history, I want to get back to Alan Bloom in The Closing of the American Mind. And I want to discuss Tubian Cosmitas, Psychological Foundations of Cultures. It's one of the opening chapters in Adapted Mind.
Yes.
So, and then I want to go back to the 7P plan because you have to have a lot of prior knowledge of what the book literatures are.
Yeah, the Tubian Cosmitas stuff is absolutely just amazing work. It's like I was saying earlier, I had a lot of eureka moments, just you're reading it and you go, oh, that's why, this or that happened. It's within, I don't know, a couple chapters of that, I had a completely different view on things. So it's very powerful stuff.
So I want to have a discussion on The Closing of the American Mind because Alan Bloom was a philosophy professor at University of Chicago. He wrote that before he died in the 90s. He's also, I got to change the slide set again. He's also a Rousseau expert in the history of political philosophy by Strauss and Cropsey at the center bottom of this slide set. So he's a contributor in that, and he wrote, this book here was the 3rd edition of the Strauss and Cropsey text written in 1987. His article on Rousseau was written years earlier, and he got so fed up in the 80s with the beginning of wokeism back then that he just wrote this scathing book on how the humanities, philosophical and social sciences had devolved since he was a student, I guess a graduate student getting his PhD at Cornell, and then he became a professor. So what happened from the 1960s into the 70s and 80s? In this book, he writes it from the point of view of political philosophy and political science, because those were the departments that he taught in at Chicago. In it, he talks about the 1960s liberals, the civil rights, and Vietnam War protesters. They got their PhDs in the 60s, 70s, and 80s And by the time the 80s rolled around, they had taken over the department chairs in the soft philosophical and social sciences that had not yet adapted objective standards and measures. So he uses that phrase as he goes through the different chapters in the books and talks about how they moved into the different fields of anthropology, sociology, the different areas of philosophy. And this becomes very, very important because they moved into the fields that didn't have objective measures and standards. And then as we get into the slide set series, the ones that were starting to develop it, they put the kibosh on those things and stopped it. And then they just been arguing against the fields of economics and demography to the point where he talks about an economics professor was shouted down during the mid to late 60s on Cornell. And they gave the guys, they made his life living hell. So he had to ended up leaving the university and teaching someplace else. And that shouting down of conservatives on campus is in this book here, A Critique of Pure Tolerance. They talk about how fascists and neo-Nazis have to be shouted down. So way back then is when they started calling all conservative Christians and people that believed in the patriarchal nuclear family structure. That's when they started labeling them all fascists and whatever.
Which language has everything to do with this. These people are not coming up with this. These individual college students aren't coming to the conclusions themselves. They're being told to basically combat these things in that style. Which anybody who's a fan of, Shapiro definitely comes to mind. Just so many different people that they've had universities that riot and will burn down their own buildings so people can't speak. So we've absolutely been seeing that.
Yeah, to stop Ben Shapiro from speaking, or Ann Coulter, or anybody like that.
Yep.
In this slide set, I need to build up these the history of leftist thought slide sets, just so people can get an idea of what the books are. My mother went to New Paltz, so she got all these books assigned to her at New Paltz. So I grew up having these things laying around the house. Then I just collected more and more of them because you can get them on used bookstores. So I'm just putting these books up there because otherwise you're like going to say, well, wait, the left took over the university system and demoralized society, like Yuri Bezmenov said. That's a conspiracy theory, or how did this happen? With the 7P plan, we're explaining how it happened. That's what we're explaining with this. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's a phenomenon, and people need to understand the phenomenon, and then people need to decide whether they think it's good or bad.
Right.
We're here to present this. Okay, we think it's bad. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this in-depth of a conversation. But we want to give people the tools to analyze this for themselves.
And you've got the Frankfurt School up there, which is, people don't know about the Frankfurt School. That is really fascinating stuff.
Yeah. It's, what's his name? Stephen Hicks does a whole bunch of videos on postmodernism. I want to get into this real quick because every time you have a Marxist communism failure or a market socialism failure, the left just rebrands and goes on. They keep on thinking that socialism will work next time. Again.
Now, sorry to stop you real quick. One thing I've always wondered, though, is nobody's stopping people from making their own commune and doing this. So what is it about these socialists that they have to come interrupt our lives and then try to make us conform to what they want? Nobody's stopping them from having their own socialist utopia out in some, out in Nevada or wherever they want to buy some farmland. Why are they so hell-bent on changing our lives?
Oh yeah, the experiments where they have done that in the United States have just been absolute disasters. Pareto 80, 20/80 or 80/20 rule. 20% of the people do all the work, and yeah, the bottom 20 just freeloads, and yeah, it absolutely doesn't work. The 20% need to manage the other 80%. That's just a given. And then ultimately in free market theory, it's whether you have a tight wage labor market or a catastrophically loose wage labor market. We're going to get into that. But I just want people, I'll build these thumbnails up in the different slide sets. Well, in this slide set, I want to build it up and expand it so people can see specifically what books were written in what years, so they can see how communism or how leftism keeps on getting rebranded after each Marxist, communist, and socialist failure somewhere in the world.
Correct.
But the constant is still Rousseau's discourse on inequality, where you got to get rid of property rights, marital rights, and religion. So it doesn't matter if when I talk to college professors, they'll be like, "Oh no, Foucault wasn't for communism. He saw it. He went to Czechoslovakia and it didn't work, and he's for this." No, they keep on rebranding. Rousseauism is what they're rebranding. So you have the constant is always getting rid of property rights, marital rights, getting rid of the nuclear family, going to a matriarchy, and then inventing a system, a welfare state that will take care of single parent mothers. So Marx might have had two focuses, one on improving the lives of the working class, and the other one was getting to a matriarchal family and a equitable government that would be equitable for the working class and the matriarchal family. Ultimately, it just comes down to a matriarchy, and a matriarchy is just an unwed mother. There's no way to sugarcoat that. They sugarcoat that in the different leftist literature over time. Janice Fiamingo does great videos on that. So Marxism and feminism always goes hand in hand. And I need to start putting all of those books or the key books in this slide set too. So this thumbnail slide set probably needs to radically expand, but people need to see what books I'm talking about. All right, let me stop there. Go back to Alan Bloom again. So Bloom starts talking about they've taken the classics of philosophy out. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Okay, Socrates didn't write any books. We only really know what Plato said about him. But the key feature there is the nomos physics distinction of human ideals versus human nature and objective measures of standards, or standards and measures. So the critical feature in that is once they made freshmen and sophomores not read Plato and Aristotle anymore, college students now, or for the past several decades, aren't even aware that Plato's talking about a problem of you have an ideal society, but each generation keeps on changing the constitutional laws a little bit. Each generation, society peaks and then it collapses. So it's not linear directional, it's cyclical. Nations rise and fall. That's what the ancient Greeks thought. And then Aristotle talks about the same thing. How to create an ideal society, they don't know. It comes along by chance, but historically, we already know what the answer is. When elites are in conflict with other elites during the breakout period in John Glubb's Fate of Empires version. It's the simplest version of the rise and fall of empires out there. Well, a lot shorter than Spengler's Decline of the West. So that's a good book for people to get introduced into that. But what the elites bond with their masses when they're at conflict with their neighbors, they get a productive cooperative dynamic within their society. They take over their region and then their greater region where they become an empire. Then once that happens, so you go in Spengler's spring, summer, fall, winter analogy, also used by Toynbee. But when in the spring period, when they break out, the elites and the masses are bonded well. During the summer period also. But during the late summer and into autumn, once they've reached their logistical ends of their supply routes where their empire just can't build out anymore, that's when the elites start trading and cooperating with the other elites to maintain the system. And then that's when they stop bonding with their masses and start selling out their people to make deals with other world leaders, and then society collapses. So guess what period we're in? So the different rise and fall of government books, like Paul Kennedy and some of those people, or J.D. Unwin or John Glubb, they're talking about rise and fall of particular empires in 250-year cycles, like the Fourth Turning. That's been a popular book lately. You get into Nietzsche, where he talks about in Europe, you have the rise and fall of great powers, but Europe as a whole is still an empire. It goes from Rome to France to Great Britain and then Pax Americana. And then he says that's going to fall. And then he says those things rise and fall in 1,000-year cycles. So you have different cyclical theories dealing with 250 years, like the Fourth Turning guy, or you have 1,000-year cycles of a whole Western culture like Nietzsche. So people can think of these terms. The leftist thought's linear directional. They think the United States is going to go towards socialism now, and we're going to go up. So that's the argument between cyclical theorists and linear directional. The Cloward and Piven people think they're going to collapse society and rebuild it, and it improves. The cyclical theorists, like myself, think that it collapses and you have to totally rebuild again. So those are the two schools of thought. So I want to go from Alan Bloom. Oh, and those schools of thought are taught in Strauss and Cropsey text, History of Political Philosophy. What I did, that book explains everything in a chronological order. I literally took it's an anthology where they do summaries of the greatest works. I physically took those books that they talked about from the great thinkers, and I literally put them into a liberal versus conservative matrix, like David Hume versus Marx and Engels, started lining up their foundational philosophies in a linear programming type literature review matrix on the floors. So I lined them up in those terms. And then I also took Bacon and Descartes. Wait, do I have that? Where do I have them? Oh, wait, here it is. I'm sorry. Okay. Bacon wanted to take the Newtonian scientific methods of a priori hypothesis, testing, careful observation, and then at the end of it, ex post facto analysis and theoretical formulation. He wanted, science is not Tony Fauci. it's a 3-step process. So just so everybody knows. Okay. I had to throw that joke in there because that was, anyway. Bacon wanted to take the Newtonian principles and put it into philosophy and the social sciences so they become empirical. And Rene Descartes started talking about in his Discourse and Method and how to start to build measurement systems. So you have, look, like I was explaining before, he built a Cartesian system in mathematics, well, independent versus dependent variables, and what those are is when you start to build measurement system, you have a nominal measurement system of just the entire spectrum, one end to the other. So I use the football field analogy of goal line to goal line or end line to end line. If you go from nominal measures to ordinal measures, then you're cutting it in half and saying one side is good or one side is bad, or one side's for the home team, the other side's for the visiting team. So you have a balance scale, or it could be a 0 to 1 scale, which obviously can go to a 0 to 10 scale or 0 to 100 scale. So if you're building a scale like that, it would be one goal line to the other would be 100 yards, but football fields are balance scales. So you got the 50-yard line in the middle, like a seesaw. It's got a balance. You're on one end of the field or the other. Whether one team is on their end of the field or the other, whether you interpret that good or bad, depends on whether you're for the home team or you're for the visiting team. So it's a matter of perspective. That's how you build measurement systems. So you got nominal, one end zone to the other, one end of the spectrum to the other. Ordinal, you cut it in half. You go to interval levels of scales. You break a football field down to 10-yard lines, 5-yard lines, and then incremental 1-yard hash marks. So then you get more of an intricate measurement system. So then you can start placing stuff into different categories. Where are you in this spectrum? So you go nominal, ordinal, interval. So the next one's ratio level of modeling. If you take two interval ratio levels and you put them together in an XY axis, then you can start calculating slope. One thing changes in respect to the other. So you can start building functions, calculate slope, and start putting data into mathematical equations, which is what Rene Descartes is the founder of. So with Bacon and Descartes, you get how to get the scientific method and measurement systems into philosophy and the social sciences. So when we start talking about the scientific project, okay, so Bacon wanted to introduce the scientific project to the philosophical and social sciences, and Descartes, and this is the early Enlightenment period, and Descartes wanted to put mathematical measurement systems into the philosophical and social sciences. So when you get to Tooby and Kosmita's Psychological Foundations of Culture, what they're talking about is the physical engineering sciences all are in compatible methodologies and compatible frameworks. So let's say electronic engineers can work with civil engineers to make a car work. And then in the biological sciences, biologists and medical doctors can communicate to make somebody healthy. But then when you get into evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology relates to people's behaviors, and then they have an integrated causal model. Then they say once narrow evolutionary psychology gets into social psychology, anthropology, and sociology, then after that, the philosophical and social sciences become an absolute, complete, chaotic mess. They argue that they have no compatible methodologies and no compatible frameworks. They say that once the 1960s liberals took over the department chairs in the 1980s, the system was completely destroyed and they totally abandoned the scientific project. So I want to end this video here by talking about Alan Bloom was arguing this from the history of political philosophy, and Tubia and Cosmides and the evolutionary theorists are looking at this from the field of evolutionary biology and psychology. They don't know what the answer is to fixing this. They're just saying it is. And you get a whole bunch of other professors talking about the problem. We're offering the solution, and where this has gone, and it's going to be a highly explanatory model